It was in the oldest times, before the world was covered in forest and iron was tamed by dwarven masters, before the advent of humanity and the mastery of bread and ale-making arts. The world was then ruled by dragons and demons. Yes, draconic serpents and demonic creatures were the princes and princesses of the oldest times. They were the primordial forces through which the world and its primeval matter was formed: the sky, the mountains, and the fiery oceans of magma and unthinking life. In the early 80s, Magic World by Chaosium and the BRP system itself were melded together and translated to the finest of northern tongues, Swedish. It's gone through several iterations under the name of Drakar och, most recently owned by a company that did some interesting things with the IP, or rather with the name. And really, that game had little to do with its origin. We learned recently that Free League had acquired the rights to the property, and it's now live on Kickstarter as, in English, surprisingly, Dragonbane, and of course, Drakar och in Swedish. I'm really, really excited, as I always am, let's face it, to be joined by Free League's Tomas Härenstam, and of course by our wonderful Swedish GM and patron Joel. So without further ado, let's bring on the fun. So with Devious Dungeons, Foreboding Forests, and The Coolest Cats, my name is Phil. Hit that like button, subscribe to us as we go to the Dark Orb. Hello friends, how are you?
Hello.
Oh, it's an exciting time. We spoke about this game, well, quite a while ago when the announcement was made originally for Free League bringing Drakar och back as a reimagined game in Swedish. And we're joined with Tomas from Free League to talk about it right now. Tomas, how are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Good. I'm good. Good to be on the show.
Welcome back. It's been a while. We last saw you obviously for the Blade Runner game, which was
Yeah.
tremendous. We're all very excited about it. Um, can you tell me a little bit about the history and what is Drakar och? Because us that are English-speaking natives, most of us haven't heard of it.
Yeah. No, I think you did a nice little summary there at the beginning. It actually started out, I mean, this is something that I think most Swedish role players might not even be aware of, that it actually started out as a translation of Magic World by Chaosium. But that was the first, very, very first edition of the game, came out in 1982. I think the founder of the company that published it, that was like the RPG publisher in Sweden called Äventyrsspel, or they also had a second name of Target Games, but
Yeah.
Äventyrsspel Adventure Games, that's what they were known as. I think he did an internship, I believe, at Chaosium very early in the 80s. And coming back to Sweden, he felt like this thing, this role-playing stuff, that I need to bring this here. And so he did with a group of others, and they started this and released the first edition of Drakar och Demoner, which was, I mean, the name obviously inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, but the actual game design and the rules was quite different because that was from the more Chaosium side. So it's more based on RuneQuest and that type of mechanics. So mechanically, it's quite different. But that what happened is that this became such a big hit. You could, I mean, especially not the first edition, but I think the second edition, like the black box from 1984. I actually have it here. This was not even planned. It was just lying around here. This is my old copy. That one, that game, you could basically find it in almost, I would say, most families in Sweden in the mid 80s had this, even though, it was just so commonplace and most, maybe not everybody played it, but it played a lot, and a lot of people had it. It was in all the toy stores. You could see it everywhere, and that really was the basis for the whole role playing phenomenon in Sweden. And what happened is that since this game was so popular, it meant that Dungeons and Dragons was never. I mean, it was played, but it was never big here. It's gotten bigger now in recent years, but back in the 80s and 90s, Drakar och Demoner was the game in Sweden, not Dungeons and Dragons.
It's kind of turned on its head, if you like, that I guess out there You'd be saying, "Oh, don't play that niche American rubbish."
Yeah, yeah.
They actually translated the Dungeons and Dragons to Swedish,
Yeah.
but it wasn't a success. So the red box and the blue box got translated, and then it stopped because it was a failure compared to the Äventyrsspel Drakar och Demoner.
And I think Tomas, you and Joel could probably have an old Drakar och Demoner box off, because
Oh, yeah.
I think you
Definitely.
probably have similar copies
Yeah,
not too
yeah.
far away from you. So how important was that game to you, Tomas, growing up?
Oh, it was hugely important. It was actually not my very first game. My very first game was the other one by the same company, because there were like two big games, and that was Mutant. And that is also
You should do
the
something with that
basis.
IP at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of the first games that Free League did, was Mutant Year Zero, which is
Yes.
our version of Mutant. So we're still licensing the Mutant IP, or if you will, from actually the same person, Fredrik Malmberg, who I mentioned earlier. He is now running a company called Cabinet Entertainment. They own like Conan and stuff, but also still the old Mutant brand, which we then turned into Mutant Year Zero. So we're working with that one as well. That was my first game. Drakar och Demoner was my second game. So I played it probably, I was 11 when I got my first RPG. I got Mutant, the first edition, for my 11th birthday in 1985. And I think me and my brother, who was a bit older, we started playing this stuff, not really knowing what we were doing. And then we realized there was another game around as well. It was like cool, like the guy with a sword on it, and it was like fantasy stuff. And my brother was a huge Tolkien fan at that time, so he was like, "Oh, we have to do this." And then we just took off and played Drakar och Demoner for a very, very long time.
Awesome. And so I can imagine that you had quite a lot of fun with building those worlds, and there was nothing really quite like it in Sweden at the time, right?
No,
So,
I mean, that was a complete. I mean, just the whole experience of just looking through the books and the art. There was an artist, an iconic artist called Nils Gulliksson, who did the art of the 1984 edition, and he was like the illustrator for both Mutant and Dr. Moner. But specifically, I remember his Dr. Moner stuff, and we actually made a game based on his Drakar och Demoner art, which is Forbidden Lands. So it's
Yeah.
a bit of a, it's very all mixed together. So that art is now a lot of it is in Forbidden Lands, because that he had that black and white style. But that was the first time I had ever seen art like that, fantasy art like that. It was just not around in like 1985 in Sweden. It was not. There was no internet. You couldn't see fantasy movies and films, and there was like nothing. There were comic books. I remember reading Conan comic books. That was probably the closest. But this kind of fantasy art, just that part was amazing. And then just diving into these worlds. And we played this game. It was basically my older brother and his friends, and I kind of tagged along. And it was very freewheeling. It was not. We didn't play like huge pre-written campaigns. It was very much just making the world up, drawing maps, and making stuff up as we went along. It was very sort of weirdly creative and chaotic and fun.
And of course, you can even see that through games like Forbidden Lands, where you have the adventure sites and
Yeah,
it's very open world. I would love to just touch on Nils Gulliksson a little bit as well. There is an amazing art book. I think Free League, you published that, right? Which is
Yeah.
in Swedish, and
Yeah.
probably there's some copies still available somewhere. Definitely worth checking out. My copy is behind me on the shelf, and it's
Nice.
stunning. But it's also incredible when you think that the artwork that is there, that many of us know from Forbidden Lands, is actually has this grand heritage. And you can see influences of Neil's style, obviously, in Johan Egerkranz's style as well. Obviously, he has many influences, but you can definitely feel that pull.
Oh yeah.
There. Who else have you got involved with this project? I mean, I can imagine that. In fact, I know, because we've looked at the campaign, that there are some heavy hitters from the history of Swedish role playing, as well as kind of current lifeblood.
Oh yeah, I mean, we really wanted to make Drakar och Demoner. It doesn't belong to Free League. It belongs like to everyone, every role player in Sweden, and we wanted to bring in also because they're great creators, great writers, but we'll also just to get the sense of this broader community. So we wanted to bring on a mix of like old seasoned RPG writers from back in the 80s, people who worked with the original Drakar och Demoner, people like Gunilla Jonsson, Mikael Petersen, and also we have Roger Undhagen and a bunch of others who did that early work. But then also to mix that, because it's not a complete, it definitely, we want the whole game to honor the heritage, but it's also not a completely retro game. It's not that. We want to make something that also feels, new and fresh. So we wanted to kind of showcase that by bringing on these classic, iconic RPG writers from here, but also new talent and people who have been doing great stuff in recent years. And we have people like Moa Frithiofsson and Gabriel de Boer and some others who do great stuff in more recent time, and kind of bring that together to really showcase the whole range of RPG creators in Sweden today.
You put out it's reimagined Drakar och Demoner, or Dragonbane. Dragonbane, of course, is not a reimagined version, but Drakar och Demoner is. In what way do you consider it a reimagination? And for our generation, this being kind of a holy grail, the holy ground, how does it feel to reimagine a product from our childhood like this?
Yeah, it's scary and interesting, but it's also been a long time dream. I mean, even when Free League started out, I think we had the first conversation in 2012. So it must be 10 years ago now, with Riot Minds, who owned the brand and the license back then until recently, until we acquired it from them. But back then we discussed maybe doing some kind of license with them, because they had they had done one version and they was a bit unsure what was going to be the next thing, and so we had talks with them, and they were close to actually happening, but for some reason we felt back then that we couldn't quite afford it, and we were just starting out. We had nothing released yet, I think, maybe like, and so we basically had to turn it down, and nothing came of it back then. And instead, we started working with Mutant, and that took off and happened. And then we just, and basically nothing. But then Drakar och Demoner always stayed with us. So throughout the years, I don't know, a couple of times in the 10 years that have passed, we talked to Riot Minds again, whether this could we do something together with them or a license again, and then we discussed actually purchasing the license, and at the first couple of years that was not possible, but then things changed. And in any case, it's been it's always been at the back of our minds. I think it's been a kind of a dream, so I think we spent a lot of time just thinking about what it could be like, even long before we actually had the chance to actually do it. And it reimagined. It's just we kind of had the idea. It was Nils Carlén, who's one of the other people at Free League, who said it should be like a Drakar och Demoner from a different dimension, like from what he meant. I think we mean by that is it should really feel like Drakar och Demoner. It should be obvious this is Drakar och Demoner. It's not any other game, but it's just a bit, not exactly the same. It brings something different, fresh to it at the same time, and that's a bunch of different things. I mean, it needs to feel true, and that goes through all of the the artwork and the style, and also the rules need to kind of feel connected to the heritage, whereas we also wanted to bring in kind of a bit new mechanics, a bit different mechanics that kind of resolve some of the classical kind of issues that the rules tended to have, but also is the feel and tone and art should bring something a bit new and a bit different than like the very old edition. So it's Reimagine felt like a good term to use, because it needs to unmistakably be Drakar och Demoner, but it still also needs to feel a bit different and fresh.
And how was it received in the Free League office, that point when you could say, hey, we're going to do it? That must have been amazing.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I mean, we had a talk with the partners. I mean, we're a group of basically the people who founded the company, plus the Jan Ringen people who are now also part of kind of the group of founders, basically. And we had, I mean, first off, we had a discussion, should we actually do this? I mean, the first decision was, should we, I mean, we had the offer to actually purchase this license from Riot Minds and whether this would make sense. And that was not, I mean, it's always tricky. I mean, it was one of those projects that I think we all balance. Everything that we do needs to be driven by passion, but it also needs to make some kind of sense in terms of the finances, because we can't, you know, I mean, this puts food on my children's, you know, table. So I have to be sensible about these things. So it's but and this was like, okay, never mind if it's not a good idea, because then the idea then was to do it in Swedish only, because we didn't quite see how it would fit for the kind of international side. We might get to that later, but so this was mainly seen as, okay, it's going to be a Swedish only game. Will this, you know, be possible? I mean, do we actually have the manpower to do it? Does it make sense? And in the end, we realized, but it doesn't really matter. We just want to, we just want to do this. It doesn't matter if it's not the smartest decision ever. We're just going to do it anyway. And then from then on, it was just like, of course we're going to do this. You know, you know, it's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah.
So now you open the floodgates for the question about the English version.
Yeah.
So you brought this upon yourself.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
did you decide that an English version was a feasible option, or at least a risk worth taking?
Yeah, I think it was in early this year, maybe around February, March, something. I think up until that time we had considered this a Swedish only project, and that because we felt we have so many other fantasy RPGs on the international market, and Drakar och is very much, I mean, it has its own tone. I'll get to that also, I guess, but it's still fairly straightforward, classic fantasy in the same. I mean, it doesn't have a very specific setting that I mean, compared to the One Ring or Symbaroum or something like that. It's much of a more general. So it felt like, how does that even fit in with the others? And so we kind of put that aside and figured, oh, we'll just do it in Swedish. But then what really happened was that we started working on it. And when you work with something, you kind of, hopefully, I mean, if it's any good, you kind of fall in love with it, and just you realize this, we could and pour your heart into it, and you can feel that this is going to be a pretty good game. I mean, we're going to work hard with this, and we're going to, you know, pour our, you know, hearts and souls into it, and really work with it. And then it's like, so why not do it in English? Because we also felt that when we announced this, we're probably going to have some interest about it. We even had some interest from other partner publishers in Europe, like I don't know exactly who now, but I think in Germany and France, and they were like, "Oh, this Dragonbane is interesting." It's like, if they are interested in doing a translated version, maybe we should actually consider doing it in English and just see what happens. If there is enough interest there, just going from it's the original, you know, whatever Swedish RPG, it's something from Free League, it's going to have awesome art, and if we just kind of see how that is received. And I think also what happened is that when we started working on it just for the Swedish version, we still needed to kind of hone down and be more specific in what Dragonbane would be for us this time around. What would this Dragonbane be compared to when we just got the license and it was just Dragonbane? You know, it could be anything really. But now it's like, what are we actually going to be doing here? How is this going to be different? What's going to be the style and tone? And then we realized this is actually going to be a game that is quite different from the other fantasy RPGs that we have. It has a lighter tone. It's more, sometimes can even go into the comedic side of things. It's not a comedy game, but it can definitely have that. It's got the anthropomorphic animals. It has the ducks and the wolfkin and all of that stuff. And it's not, and that's, at least to my experience and the way I see the whole game, it's not like grimdark, super serious. It's not like, you know, that. And we felt that if we focus on that and create something that is a bit more playful, fun, easy to run. I mean, not only for beginners, but great for beginners. Like that game, if someone asks, I don't know about this role-playing stuff, where should I start? And this is the game you hand them. And that, we felt we lacked a game like that, even on the English international side. So then we realized this could actually be a pretty good thing to do. And why not do it in English? See what happens, see if anyone is interested, and just take it from there.
Is there any chance that this might open the floodgates for any of your other Swedish-only games to come to English? Specifically, and I'm going to completely butcher this pronunciation, but we've started playing Undergångens Avtagare, which was amazing. And yeah, we'd love to pick it up and bring more of that into English. But that's only a small example. You have things like Svavelwind and stuff as well.
Yeah.
Stop hiding all that other good stuff, Tomas.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think yes and no. I mean, I think those those first games that we did, Svavelvinter and Morwhale, they were, I mean, nice games. I think they have perhaps done their thing. I think Svavelvinter is actually available as a kind of a quick start thing, a PDF in English. So I think, I don't know where it is now, if it's online, but it should be. In any way, if you want to check it out,
if you search, you can find it. I'm pretty sure it's hiding somewhere.
But it's also because I mean that Svavelvinter is also based on a series of novels who were in turn based on a campaign for a campaign for the Drakar och Demoner. So that also, the whole heritage, the area of the country there, the island called Trakoria, that was created by the same writer, Erik Granström, who wrote that as a campaign for Drakar och Demoner. So it's very much in the Drakar och Demoner DNA. I mean, and Symbaroum, which is done by the Jan Ringen, that was really their Drakar och Demoner in a sense. I mean, that was there's lots of stuff in there that is direct. I mean, very inspired by Drakar och Demoner, and they even have like I know the campaign world for Drakar och Demoner, the official one back in the 80s, was called Ereb Altor, and in the country where the humans came from in Symbaroum is called Alberator. So it's just a play on words on that thing. So there are so many. I mean, that has very strong connections to Drakar och Demoner. Forbidden Lands is basically the original Free League's kind of homage or whatever to the early Drakar och Demoner stuff. So we already have so much of that. So I don't think we can do Svavelvinter also again. It's just going to be, now we actually have Drakar och Demoner. So I think we'll be focusing on that. It's just going to be nuts. And Symbaroum and Forbidden Lands will definitely stay because they're very much in active development, and they have their own style and tone. We're not getting rid of those, but I think to actually start up another game that is like basically somewhere derived from Drakar och Demoner might be a bit too much. But yeah, you never know. As for Undergångens Avtagare, which was the previous version of Mutant that Jan Ringen did before they joined forces with us, and that was like before Mutant Year Zero. It's a very nice game, and we did a bit of a follow-up on that called Mutant Hindenburg. That was released only in Swedish, but
I have that only in Swedish, thanks.
Yeah. So
beautiful.
Yeah, we'll see. We are looking at Mutant in a bigger perspective, and possibly, hopefully, doing it, down the line, a new edition of Mutant, which will be then leaning toward. It won't be Undergångens Avtagare right off, and it won't be Year Zero. It will be something in between. So it will definitely lend things from Undergångens Avtagare, even though it won't be that exact game.
So filling the blank spot in Free League's Mutant catalog between Year Zero and Hindenburg.
Exactly. Yes.
Bringing it back to Drakar och Demoner, Dragonbane. In fact, we did. You touched on this earlier. We did on our new podcast, which you can find on some good podcasting app. Just search for The Dark Orb. But we did actually ask the question: is there space for another fantasy tabletop role-playing game IP? We're, of course, hugely biased, and the answer is therefore yes. But it is really cool to hear that you had this exact conversation and took that into account. And I believe it's safe to say, judging by the success of the Kickstarter, that you've made a good choice there. It's doing really well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, today it's great to see the interest from both. I mean, obviously from Swedish players, but also around the world. So I mean that, and I think it does have a place. It is a game. It does bring something a bit different to the table, and it's. I mean, we have just when we've been playtesting this game now for the last 6 months or so. it just feels different and fun, and it's not the same as the others. So yeah, I think the answer is yes to that. I mean, if you like the style and tone of this, I think it's going to definitely be, bring something new.
And of course, in English, you have the tagline of mirth and mayhem.
Right? Yeah, that was that was kind of a kind of a late thing, but we felt we needed, because obviously in the Swedish environment, we don't really need to explain what Drakar och is. I mean, at least
No,
not to
it's true.
role players. To
Yeah.
other people, maybe, but even there, most people even know what it is. It's like, basically, it's like, asking someone in the US what Dungeons and Dragons is. Most people will basically know, even they, and you definitely don't have to explain it to role players. So but then we needed to explain this game a bit to others. I mean, to Drakar or this Drakar to an international market, and we felt we needed something. And this name, this kind of tagline or whatever, it was just something that I actually had lying around that I had used as a title for actually a mutant-like RPG that I wrote or worked on back in the 90s. So it was just like, but then we felt like that never went anywhere. That was way before Free League. But then but what about this one? And we just felt that, yeah, it kind of captures in a sense what the game is about. So why not use that?
And I suppose literally what does it mean? How do you create or enforce from a system and a setting that there is mirth and mayhem in a game? Let me qualify that. We quite often see games that are designed as quirky games and comedy games, and it can be quite easy for that to not actually translate to the table. And obviously a lot of that is on the GM, but you mentioned that it felt different to play. Can you give an example of
Sure.
how it feels different, and maybe some suggestion for anyone who's not yet looked at the quick start of what is different from D&D, for example?
Right. Yeah, I think first off, it's not, I mean, because you're right. I think purely, I mean, comedic games, like comedy games, I haven't played that many. I have played some. I remember like something called Two back in the 80s.
That right there.
Big cartoon. Yeah, and that never worked for me at all. It just felt you're supposed to make it funny, but it doesn't. It was kind of, it felt forced to me.
Yes.
I'm sure others have had fun with that game. I have no idea, but that never really worked for us. So, I mean, that's not really what we're trying to do here. It's much more of it's a fairly straight on fantasy game. It has, dungeon crawl, you have, treasure. But I think the difference is that sets it apart is that both in terms of the scenarios, the adventures you play, kind of the kind of structure, the characters you meet, the characters you play, and also the game mechanics themselves they're quite fast. They lend themselves to brutal but enjoying fun situations and it's not. I mean, in some of the other games we have like things like long lists of critical injuries and stuff. That works for some games. Here it's a bit more, you get knocked down, you get back up again. Strange things happen, and it's a quite freewheeling type of play style. So it's not hugely different. I wouldn't say I mean, I think compared to D&D, which is fairly, in some sense, it's similar in that it's a general fantasy game in that sense that has all what you would expect. It's not like super specific, but it's compared to that. I feel that the game system is not as it doesn't quite. It does have its mechanics, which are important, but it's not. I mean, D&D is so much about getting the right build, and it has that progression, which makes D&D fun, the leveling up and choosing abilities. But it also very mechanical. I mean, the mechanics are very much in front and center. I think here it's a bit breezier, easier. The mechanics are there, but they're not front and center in the same way, and that gives more freedom to explore characters and tell fun stories. I think that is a difference compared to to D&D, but it's still a game in that same general sphere, I guess.
Yeah, I would summarize that as I usually do when I talk about role-playing games, and that is I prefer games where the system supports the play. You don't play the system. And I believe the Swedish background in RPGs is very much there. You have a rule system underneath the story you're telling that you fall back on when you need it, but it is not up front center and you play the system and wrap the story around the system.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And that's the beauty of the BRP. But if we go to the weaknesses of the BRP, a lot of BRP systems, and this is true for all editions of Drakar and as well, when it comes to the skill, since it's a skill-based system, the level of balance between the number of skills and the complexity of the skills, how have you solved that to keep this one streamlined and flowing?
Yeah, that's I mean, that's a classic thing, right? I think for this, since it's a skill-based system, and many of the early editions had maybe not the earliest editions didn't have that many skills, but then the kind of that when it evolved and the expert version and so on, then basically the number of skills ballooned, and it was also at a time when realism was kind of the coolest thing. I mean, when more detail was that was like the late 80s, I think, and that was not only for BRP style games, but in general that you had these super detailed, super crunchy games. And that kind of worked its way into these games as well, where you had extremely long skill lists and things like that. That was one of the problems, and that kind of created the issue that you couldn't do that much because if you have lots and lots of skills, there will be lots and lots of skills that you don't have. So that means you can't do that much. And also, there's another problem with the progression, because when whether it's 1 to 100 or 1 to 20, there have been both versions. We're doing 1 to 20, but throughout the history there have been D100 versions and D20 versions, but always roll under your skill level to succeed. But the problem that has come up quite often is that when you get your skill level becomes too high, it kind of breaks the system. When you pass like 90, 95, even to 100, then basically, I mean, it's a hard cap. When you get too good at a skill, you cannot fail, and it kind of the system breaks down a little bit. There are a variety of ways to solve this problem, but the way we have tried to approach it is to first of all have not hundreds of skills, just to get, because that does not support the play style that we envision for this game. So it's I think 16 skills or something like that. So it's a manageable amount of skills. And also progression is done in a way that will make it increasingly difficult to raise a skill level, and it's actually capped at 18, which is or 90% basically. You cannot go any higher than that, and even getting there is going to be very hard. So you will be encouraged to actually improve on other areas instead. And then there is also something called heroic abilities, which are separate from the skills, where you can evolve as well. So even if you hit the cap on a skill, that doesn't mean you cannot improve. You can still improve other skills and also get these heroic abilities, which will give you special moves and special abilities to keep improving even though you hit the skill cap. So I guess that's two ways that we have approached skills, which have been a bit difficult in the past to manage.
So I suppose we should probably just, for anyone that doesn't know the difference between BRP, basic role playing, and like a D20 system, they're essentially similar in some ways, but with the BRP systems, and this includes even things like Symbaroum has some similarities, and Call of Cthulhu has similarities as well. You have a rating, which in Dragonbane, the maximum is 20. In many other games with the same system, it's 100, and you roll under your rating, and then that rating basically gives an idea of how good you are at something. And you have some core stats, which are representing your strength and your agility and that sort of stuff. But you also have your abilities, which might be how good you are at driving or cooking casserole or whatever. You can have a kind of almost limitless number of these special skills. And in Drakar and Dragonbane, you've actually kind of boiled that down to a small number of vital things. One thing that I would say is quite common especially in BRP games, but also just new games in general, and Merkbor is a good example of this. It seems to be a propensity towards super deadly games right now, and BRP seems to natively support super deadly games. Is Dragonbane particularly deadly for the player? Are your characters likely to survive their first scenario, or should you come with several backups?
It's pretty deadly, but still, it's more of we kept damage ratings up and hit points down, and it also, I think you're right that BRP style games naturally support this, because you usually don't increase hit points because when you level up or anything like that, because there are no levels and the hit points usually kind of remain the same, so you stay fairly mortal even though you get more experienced. But don't want to kill off characters too easily either. So basically, what we do is that yes, you can get knocked out fairly easily, but you have plenty of chances to actually survive and fight another day. But yes, you will definitely be at risk when entering that first dungeon or whatever the adventure may be. That it is deadly, and if we just feel it's more fun that way. I think, at least my personal taste, that if you feel completely safe, that your character is completely safe from harm and risk, it kind of makes the game less interesting. So yeah, we do definitely lean toward the deadlier side of things.
It also helps a lot with that level cap. If your character doesn't get there, then you don't have to worry about it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So then I wanted to ask a completely different question. And that is, you mentioned earlier some of the creators, probably from the game's background. I know they are from the game's background, like Roger Undhagen. And as a stretch goal now for the 6 million level, we have the Misty Island, a classic scenario for Drakar och reimagined. And I seem to remember earlier interviews in Swedish when there were no English version on the table for this one. A lot of talks about recreating some other adventures that he wrote. Is that still on the table?
Yes, it most certainly is. He's an interesting, person. He wrote a lot of the very early stuff. This one, Dimman, the Island of Mist, was one of the very early stuff he did, and he also wrote. Well, actually, he started a classic early campaign trilogy, which is called Adam's Väg or Path of Glory. He wrote the first two adventures. One is called Döda skogen, the Dead Woods, I guess. And the second, Maktens portar, which would be the Gates of Power. And but then after the second one, he never got to do the third one. I don't know the details, but he left basically Äventyrsspel at that time and was never heard from again until now. So actually, someone else completed that. That was actually another. I mean, it was Mikael Petersen, who's also a great RPG writer, who did the third. He filled in and wrote that third part. It's actually called Heart of Darkness. So, but the thing is that Roger Undhagen, he had already fairly detailed ideas and drafts for that third campaign part of the Path of Glory that were never happened. They were never done. It was never completed. So basically, that's been a bit of a one of those myths almost of that campaign, the final part of the trilogy, the original intended final part of the trilogy that was never actually done. And we met Roger Undhagen basically. Actually, it was I think the release thing we did for that book for Nils Gullikson's art. I think that's 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. And we started talking to him, and then when Drakar och came along, we felt that the style of the Drakar we wanted to do was fairly close to those early stuff that he did, the Döda skogen and Maktens portar, those early campaigns things. We loved that because it had that cool, mysterious fairy tale feel. It did not have a big continent or any like a detailed world. It was more like specific local, very evocative locations, and we just felt that exactly what we want to do with this Drakar moment. So we felt it was like it would be perfect to bring him on, and it would be amazing to actually see if he would be interested in actually finishing that third original part of the trilogy that was never done. So that is the plan. That is definitely still a plan. And now we'll want to do all of them, all three, the whole trilogy in both Swedish and English. But we realized that it cannot be part of this Kickstarter because that's just, we have done that mistake before. I'm throwing in too much in one Kickstarter, and then you spend years trying to catch up, and it's just very hard to do that. So we felt that it's better to focus this Kickstarter on the core set, and then do the Path of Glory campaign later as a separate thing. But so what we do have is that first thing he did that was not part of the original trilogy, Dimman, Island of Mist, and make that into a new edition of that, new version of that is now part of the, or can be if we unlock it, part of the introductory campaign, which is a smaller campaign that will be part of the core set. So yeah, we'll get some of that stuff already in the core set, but then the full trilogy will be later, but hopefully not that much later.
That's
that
really
just means
exciting.
we have goodness to look forward to.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah. So you've established how to do that, I guess, with things like Forbidden Lands, where you've expanded the world in a wonderful way. That's really cool. Very exciting. So what you're saying basically is there will be no stretch goal for Dragonbane cookbook. Is that
No
what you're saying?
cookbook for this. Yeah, exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly right.
That's a shame. I'm still waiting.
Yeah, well,
Just
it's
harken back
actually,
to Coriolis.
it is, and it is moving forward. The cookbook.
One ingredient at a time.
Yes.
It's the diet cookbook. That's what it is, and it's finished.
Yeah, definitely, very much so.
So, yeah, one thing I was interested in, we touched on this earlier. We were talking about the style and how Niels Gulliksson's art was so important. Johan Egerkrans, obviously you've worked with him previously for Versen. And his style is very much evocative of John Bauer and Brian Froud, and of course Niels Gulliksson. Did he know that you were planning on throwing the gauntlet down and getting him to illustrate this before you kind of signed on the dotted line? And how did he feel about this?
You mean with Johan Egerkrans?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that was an interesting thing with this one is that we had worked with Johan for Vaesen, Nordic Horror Role-Playing, the horror game, the Gothic horror game that we released about 2 years ago. And we had known him for quite a long time before that. So he was part of, we knew him quite well, and we really wanted to work with him. And then we had worked with him for Vaesen. But he actually did the illustrations for the previous version of Dr. Morton, which was released by Riot Minds that we discussed earlier. They released it in 2016. And that was a version that was more. Well, it didn't. There are many, of course, opinions about things, but it was the idea. They presented this as a very much a nostalgia, pure retro version. That was but then it didn't quite become that. But still, that was kind of it was a bit different from this version because we are not doing a pure. That was never the plan, but. In any case, they hired Johan to illustrate that version, and Johan's artwork is just perfect, and it's perfect for, I think, the brand and for the game that we wanted to do. And so basically, we talked to him, and we also, of course, talked to it was to Riot Minds when we acquired the rights and everything. That we actually felt that this art is too good to not. Give another chance and give new life. So that's actually why some of the art in the game is actually taken from the previous edition. It's some of the art pieces are the same. But of course, we didn't just use the existing art. We also commissioned Johan to do new art, and specifically the cover, because that was kind of an important thing that we felt has a strong, symbolic value. Of course, I mean the classic cover of the game is this art of Storebringer art that is
Yes.
just classic, and this has kind of been what has been this piece by Whelan is just completely synonymous for many people with the original Dr. Mourner. So, and the previous edition in 2016 used that exact image as the cover as well, to kind of really reconnect with the early editions. So we felt that we want to do a new art piece for the cover. We didn't want to use that same art because that we wanted to really make it clear that this is not the same game, it's something new, but still have a piece of art by Johan Egerkrans that kind of is heavily inspired by that early cover, but still different, still his style, still new. So that's basically what we asked him to do, to come up with something that had that same feel, also uses some of the same color schemes as that piece, and I think he did a brilliant job with it. So basically, you can imagine the new cover is basically the same scene, perhaps just a few seconds earlier or something like that. So it can be the same character on the cover if you want it to be.
Oh, that's wonderful.
As a Swede growing up with the covers, I recognize the new one instantly.
Yeah,
it's Drakar och by another artist, but it's still the same imagery. In the earlier interviews after you acquired IP, one of the things you stated very clearly was that your version would be streamlined for online play and streaming.
Yep.
But I haven't heard that mentioned since the Kickstarter went live. Is that still the idea of the game, or
right? Yeah.
could you elaborate on that one?
Oh, sure. It's still a thing. I guess when we first said it, we weren't quite sure what that meant ourselves. We just felt that we wanted to. I mean, since it's streaming, and I think streaming role playing is here to stay. I think it's really going to be part of role playing going forward, whether you like it or not. I mean, but I think I think it's not a bad thing at all, but it's what it is. And we wanted to. I think this game fits that because it's on when you in streams. Usually, at least the streams that I'm aware of, they tend to shy away from very crunchy, rules heavy stuff and focus more on the fun and the story, because I think that's kind of what works in a stream. So we all immediately felt that this game could work really well for that. And many streams also have this kind of comedic tone. They're usually I mean, not all, but some have that kind of light tone with a lot of laughter and a lot of fun. We felt this game actually fit that very well. So I think that was kind of the original idea, that this could be a game that could really work for that. And the way we want to support the more specifically is that, and that are we have two stretch goals up now that I hope will reach, is to do full virtual tabletop conversions, both for Roll20 and for Foundry, and not only in English but in Swedish as well. So if we do that, then this will be the first game that we release full virtual tabletop versions of, also in Swedish. Before we've only done it in English, because it's I mean, but so that is definitely something that we're doing, focusing on for this particular title. We do it for all our games more or less, but I think this one definitely.
Awesome. So I have just two things left for you. One is, can you tell us what is the most exciting thing for you about this project?
That's hard. It's so much, but it's
I know.
a chance it's to kind of revisit and reimagine a childhood dream and make that I mean, not and turn that into something new and different. I mean, I think that it's hard to beat that feeling. It's also scary, but it's also, you know, bloody amazing just to have the chance to do that. So yeah, I think that's, I guess, the core of it all.
Cool. And finally, can you complete the following sentence as a full sentence for us? You should play Dragonbane because...
You wanna have some, you know, easy, fun craziness at your role-playing table, I guess.
Beautiful. Tomas Härenstam of Free League, thank you so very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, as always. We're really excited about this game. I hope you are as well, those of you who are watching. If you've enjoyed this, then please head on over to Kickstarter. The link will be down below. And check it out. You don't have to back it at what we call on this channel the fill level, which is generally one below the retailer pledge. Obviously, that's the one that most of us at the Dark Orb have done. We're discussing this game all the time on our Discord. The link for that is also below. Please hit like, please subscribe, but please check out on Kickstarter this amazing campaign. Tomas, best of luck for the rest of the campaign. It's been wonderful, as always. We'll be back actually in a couple of days. We'll talk about the campaign on Kickstart Your Weekend this Friday. So 2 days time from now. And and we'll be back with regular content as always. Until then, thank you so much. I hope your dice rolls have been way better than mine. Thank you, Yoel, Tomas. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Bye.
Bye.